Welcome to another forum brought to you by WWCI TV 10, Indian River County's only local television station. I'm Lisa Reimer, your host for a special two-part segment discussing the Florida constitutional amendments that appear on the general election ballot. With me in the TV 10 studios, attorneys Barry Siegel, who will argue the conservative side to the amendments, and Bobby Guttridge, who will argue the liberal side. Let's meet our guests, beginning with Barry Siegel. Would you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Hi, I'm Barry Siegel. I'm an attorney practicing here in real estate in Vero Beach, Florida. I graduated from Vero Beach High School and have my office on 17th Street and 6th Avenue.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And Bobby Guttridge.
Thank you, Lisa. My name is Bobby Guttridge, as Lisa just said. I've been practicing criminal law here in the Indian River County area for approximately 15 years. I'm the immediate past president of the Indian River County Criminal Defense Lawyers Bar, and I'm on the board of the Florida Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I live here in Vero Beach with my wife, our new daughter Celeste, a cat, a dog, and a possum.
Okay, that's quite a family. And we are going to be back with 3 of the amendments in this segment, and then in tomorrow's segment we'll cover the other 3. A smile, a simple smile, can brighten up the whole world. What's between you and your beautiful smile?
I'm getting dentures, uppers and bottoms. I sat down. I'm deathly afraid of needles and pain, and I sat down in the chair. Next thing I know, my face was numb. I didn't even feel the needles. I highly recommend Dr. Thomas. Him and his staff are wonderful.
Dr. Joe Thomas's friendly staff makes every visit to the dentist a pleasure. Dr. Joe Thomas, creating sensational smiles.
Protecting the people of Indian River County is my #1 priority. I'm Darrell Lord. As your sheriff, I will continue to keep the neighborhoods and streets safe. I will be tough on criminals. Those who break the law will go to jail. I will be actively involved in our community, and I will make sure your tax dollars are being spent wisely. Indian River County is a great place to live, and as your sheriff, I'll make sure it stays that way. Please vote for me, Darrell Lord, November 4th.
Hi, my name is Brian Heady. I'm asking for your vote so I can represent you to cut wasteful spending. In today's economy, I do not support higher taxes. I support reduced government spending that will decrease our collective tax burden. Help me help you by casting your vote in November for Brian Heady for County Commissioner. This is paid for by the campaign to elect Brian Heady, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to the WWCI TV 10 Election Forum. We're discussing the 3 of the 6 amendments on the November ballot, here with 2 attorneys in Indian River County, Barry Siegel and Bobby Guttridge. We're going to begin with Amendment 1. It was put on the ballot by the Florida State Legislature at the behest, according to Jim Turner of Scripps Treasure Coast newspapers, of the Organization of Chinese Americans. The prohibition was put on the books early in the 20th century, ironically, to prevent the Chinese from buying up land. It's a declaration of rights, and this is the way it reads, proposing an amendment to the state constitution to delete provisions authorizing the legislature to regulate or prohibit the ownership, inheritance, disposition, and possession of real property by aliens ineligible for citizenship. Okay, so why don't we begin with the conservative view on what this amendment means and what your position on it is. Barry.
Well, frankly, I mean, it's going to be tough to face really any kind of opposition to an amendment like this. I mean, this is a product, surprisingly, a relatively recent revision of our Constitution from the 1950s. But it's a Jim Crow era prohibition on real estate holdings that really is very outdated, outmoded, and really serves no purpose. I don't know that you'd get any right-wing party to ever believe that property rights should ever be infringed by the Constitution, by statute, by any court in this manner at all. I mean, if there's any opposition to be found with this amendment, it would be more along the lines that it is somewhat of an unnecessary amendment in that you would be unable to enforce any kind of provision like this in any court in the United States, given the federal Constitution. And politically speaking, I don't know that you'd be able to find an elected judge to ever enforce any provision that is established in this constitutional segment. Additionally, it would require legislation to enforce this provision. The provision isn't self-operative on its own, so it's somewhat of a political grandstanding to have this amendment put before us on the ballot. There is a cost associated with running the ballots through the process, so if you'd find some kind of fault with the amendment, that would be where it would lie. But that notwithstanding, the conservative point of view, especially with regard to private property rights, would be to vote in favor of this amendment to eliminate this provision from our Constitution.
Okay, thank you, Barry Siegel. And now let's hear from Bobby Guttridge from the liberal side.
Thank you, Lisa. It's my position, as well as Mr. Siegel's, that I'm for this amendment, and some of these amendments are worded in a slightly odd sort of way. You got to sort of look back historically at how declarations of rights typically come about. The Declaration of Rights in the Florida Constitution and in Article 1 of the Florida Constitution is very similar to the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution. Those typically empower people, give them rights, give them the ability to be free from government. In this particular case, in Article 1, Section 2, which is what we're talking about, that particular provision gives normal property rights, but it creates an exception for the government to be able to
have this here on the ballot now.
Well, I don't think it'd be politically motivated with regards to, somehow inuring to the benefit of Chinese Americans, if that's the point, because this would be a bad time for them to raise that when there is fears of Chinese buying up the American assets and becoming players in the world market, and essentially us becoming sort of people that are at their will because they've bought up all the assets. So I don't think, as far as a political ploy, that the Chinese Americans would really be benefiting with regards to that. Now, on the larger issue of whether it's a political ploy, it seems kind of an odd time for them to put it up, especially in the times when there is a lot of talk of immigration, and there's a lot of people who are against foreign people coming into Florida, into Texas, into the border states, and jobs are becoming more scarce. So if anything, it seems as if ever it was going to be defeated, this is probably a time when it would be defeated. My feeling of the matter is, with regards to why they would bring it up now, is that these constitutional amendments seem to have gotten a life over the last few years, people using them to sort of ad hoc legislation that doesn't have to go through the normal legislative process. And it sort of gained some steam where people have been, the citizens of Florida and the special interest groups have tended to get their issue on the ballot where they could not, the amendment ballot, where they could not get legislators to back it up. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to get a legislator to back this up, but in this particular case, it would have to be through a constitutional amendment because it's in the Constitution. So what we're actually doing is just deleting language, and so they would, if they're ever going to delete it, you can't really do that legislatively.
Okay. Barry, do you have anything else you'd like to say about Amendment 1?
No, the only other thing I'd say is at this point in time, with the real estate market being what it is, I don't know that anybody's in a position now to want to limit the number of people that can buy it. There's plenty of it for sale, so I don't think that that would be another reason to keep some potential buyers off the books.
Right. Here to that. Okay, so that's it. From both sides, Amendment 1, vote yes. And we'll be back with Amendment 2.
Having strong, beautiful teeth is part of a healthy lifestyle. Dr. Joe Thomas uses the newest technologies and procedures to provide you with exceptional dental care. Intraoral cameras are used for disease diagnosis and patient education. Digital X-rays significantly reduce the amount of radiation and improves the quality of the diagnosis. Dr. Thomas only uses all porcelain crowns, so there is no danger of allergic reactions to metal. Porcelain crowns are more natural looking too, and they're made right in Dr. Thomas's lab, so you get your new crown the same day as your visit. Dr. Joe Thomas cares about the health of your teeth, and it shows.
Listen to what people are saying about the town of tradition in Port St. Lucie.
It's tremendous to have the shops so close by. We don't spend a lot on gas because everything's right here.
There's so many wonderful stores around here. I can just get every errand done in a single afternoon.
I think it's way beyond the value of the dollars.
For the price of a home, you buy the whole community.
Tradition is your kind of town too. Come see us today.
Welcome back to the WWCI TV 10 election coverage. I'm Lisa Reimer, here in the TV 10 studios with two attorneys, Barry Siegel and Bobby Guttridge, who are representing the left and right, respectively, on the amendments that are appearing on the November ballot. We are now about to embark on a discussion of Amendment 2, which was put on the ballot by YesToMarriage.com, an organization that admits its sole purpose is to ensure the passage of Amendment 2, preventing same-sex marriage from becoming legal in the state of Florida. So this is the Florida Marriage Protection Amendment, and it reads, "This amendment protects marriage as the legal union of only one man and one woman as husband and wife, and provides that no other legal union that is treated as marriage or the substantial equivalent thereof shall be valid or recognized." So the direct financial impact this amendment will have on state and local government revenues and expenditures cannot be determined, but is expected to be minor. Okay, so we're going to start again with the right, and Barry Siegel, would you present your understanding of the impact of this amendment and your position on that?
Okay. Well, the impact on the amendment, like many amendments, it can be very far-reaching, and I can discuss with you in a little bit. That it depends on how this amendment is actually legislated and how it's enacted. Taking a step back into kind of discussing the amendment, certainly a controversial issue, certainly a popular issue. It is the platform of the Republican Party to support marriage as being a marriage between a man and a woman, and it is not supposed to be between two men, two women, or I guess in the purpose of this amendment, 3 men, 2 women, or any such. I mean, that is the position of the Republican Party, as per their latest platform committee at the most recent convention. That said, this amendment does present some issues that, again, as Bobby was getting to in the last segment, there's a lot of issues lately that come up as through these various legislative or elective cycles that are issues that probably are better well served through a legislative body, and when a party is not able to pass some kind of measure through the legislative body, they take it on their own and they go to the amendment process, which is, of course, what this organization has done. Right now, as it stands, marriage between 2 men or 2 women, or any combination of extra parties other than a man and a woman, is illegal in the state of Florida. Additionally, as it becomes legal in other states in the union, that those marriages do not have to be recognized here in the state of Florida, as they violate the existing public policy in the state of Florida. What that means is that Congress has passed a law that says Florida or other states, you do not have to recognize a marriage from another state that is completed in violation of your public policy. So this is somewhat superfluous, in that this amendment is trying to create something that is already illegal in the state of Florida. I don't know that I've really seen much in the way of legislative action in the last decade or two, since it's even become much of an issue. They would find that position is going to be eroded by the legislature or on the statutes, on the law. The other problem that this amendment opens up is that it addresses, or could create potential conflicts with what we have with existing civil unions, which would be the unions between two men, two women that are used a lot of times for employment or insurance purposes. We hear stories of the couple that can't exercise full visitation rights in a hospital because they're not husband and wife, where hospitals have policies that say your husband or your wife can come visit. But they've opened up, in some hospitals, the ability to have those union members come in, that would not normally be recognized as husband and wife. So that, comes into question. Additionally, there is the possibility of elderly couples that, we very frequently here in the area that are living as husband and wife, but they're not married. And so we have to wonder what effect this amendment will have on this area of law. I understand that, the Republican Party's position in this matter, and it's what's adopted, and that's what the existing law is here in the state of Florida. Taking the constitutional amendment and creating somewhat of a quagmire of unintended consequences, in my opinion, is not compliant with what the conservative ideals for government is: smaller government, legislative government. This is not, in my opinion, consistent with that conservative position. For that reason, I can tell you that the Republican Party probably says mixed results. I mean, that side of the Republican Party to the strict right will say vote for this amendment. But I do have concerns on other core conservative values that tell me that this amendment probably is not consistent with the ideals of the conservative movement, or more particularly the Republican Party.
Okay, thank you, Barry Siegel. So that was a no or a yes, right? To protects marriage as is.
That was a no.
Oh, it was a no.
Well, I mean, it's to the extent that I'm asked to present the platform and position of the Republican Party as adopted by the most recent platform committee, that is a yes in favor of this amendment. To the extent that it offends other conservative values of the Republican Party, especially those with regard to government, particularly small government, as Ronald Reagan eloquently stated was what government is all about. It's a no.
Okay. So how are you going to hypothetically pull the ballot? Or no, we don't pull. How are you going to write on your ballot?
How am I going to mark my line?
Yes.
Well, I mean, we'll decide on election day, but I mean, right now, for me, the conservative values of the party, which favor smaller government, especially in a superfluous situation like this where the existing law is already on the books, I feel as though more important to me that smaller government, less invasive government is what is more important in this situation.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting summary, I think. And Bobby Guttridge, let's talk about the liberal perspective.
Well, a couple quick kind of cleanup issues. And I don't want to speak for the Republican Party or for Mr. Siegel with regards to the position, but I think that his position is probably more in line with the base Republican Party. I don't think that the large majority of Republicans are saying that there should be a constitutional amendment that would ban same-sex marriages. I think that they are mostly in line with the less government sort of approach that Mr. Siegel has put forth today. So I think it's just a fringe group, really, of folks who would actually are putting this forth, and it doesn't really mirror the entire Republican Party. Having said that, all the people who are going to vote against this, or if you lose and vote for it, it's not going to have any effect. They're not going to legalize gay marriage in Florida anytime soon. This is a very conservative state. They could have, notwithstanding this amendment, done that if they had wanted to. There's never been any support for that. There's been support in that in a few states in the United States. Those are extremely liberal-leaning states, and you just don't really see that kind of support. And it's not even a close call with regards to the type of support that you would need to have that legislated. The real problem with changing the Constitution, though, is a couple-fold. One is that where you're putting it in this Article 1 of the Constitution has historically been what we see as the best and greatest of people. It's where we have the option, as the mirror on the United States Constitution side, the Bill of Rights, it's where you see all the ideals of the Americans that we hold truest and dearest. And you usually don't see a situation where you have a taking away of rights from people. You usually have a giving of rights. And so it really doesn't fit too well in that particular section of Article 1, which typically gives people rights. It gives people the rights to privacy, gives people the rights to property, gives people the right to own property, gives them the right to free speech, to free association, the same kind of things that the Bill of Rights gives people. And so it doesn't really fit all that well. The other problem with it over the long haul is it creates a somewhat inflexible system that does not mirror society. Society has changed dramatically over the years in what we view as acceptable. There are certainly times in this country when African American and Caucasian people would not be allowed to be seen together, much less be married. They would suffer horrible discriminations. But times change, and the moral values of people change, and society's acceptance of those things change. And certainly the acceptance of gay couples and same-sex couples has changed dramatically over the last 15 or 20 years that I recall it even being an issue. When I was a kid, you just simply, there's simply, anybody who was gay was essentially in the closet. You didn't see a lot of people coming out, being proud about it, and now you see a much different situation. If we amend the Constitution, it doesn't allow for the flexibility of sort of a changing moral compass of the state of Florida, and I think that would be a sad thing for the state of Florida, and it would be sort of cheap, not giving credit to the people of Florida to allow their values to change over time and to progress and to become more socially diverse. And so for all those reasons, I don't think it's a good amendment. I don't think it's proper under the Article 1 of the Constitution. And I think it's just bad public policy.
All right. I agree with what you say, that we have come a long way to even see this on the ballot. And so I have this impression that we're moving in increments toward having or legally recognizing marriages other than between a man and a woman. Would that be a correct assumption?
Well, Lisa, I don't know if we're moving toward that. I think that maybe we're moving toward it. You certainly see other states doing it, but nothing's going to be forced on the people of Florida. You would still have to have some sort of legislative action that would create a new type of marriage between people who are not of the same sex, because the laws that are on the books now dictate that a marriage be between a man and a woman, and the rights that inure to them be between men and women. So nothing's going to be forced down the throats of the citizens of Florida if there comes a time, and I certainly don't see that anytime soon. I mean, I think it's safe that for the immediate future and probably for the far-reaching future that marriage in Florida is going to be between men and women. But if there comes a time, we don't want to have a constitutional amendment that says you can't do that and have to go back to the amendment process if it's still intact in the same manner and take that off the books.
In Canada, they do have. They don't permit discrimination against people according to their sexual orientation. And the Civil Rights Act that was enacted in 1964 in the United States, it's the only group of people that didn't gain protections from the Civil Rights Act. So it's the only group of people that are not included as a group. Is that correct? Protected in this country, in employment, mostly in employment.
I mean, I think you'll see it prevalent in some of the hate crimes that you can fall into classifications as a hate crime against homosexuals, that you do have protection there. And again, what Bobby was saying, I mean, it's a function of time, back in the 60s, if you were gay, many times you were in the closet, and that's when a lot of the Civil Rights Acts, of course, of 1964 were written. So, that was a function of the time. It's tough to say, what legislative action will take place. And I guess that's another good reason to mention, an issue with this amendment is it is something to be legislated. I mean, our government is a Republican form of government. I don't mean that it's the Republican Party, but we elect our representatives to go to Tallahassee. We elect our representatives to go to Washington to do a job for us and to do the will of the people, because it's something that is just too large for the entire country to do as a pure democracy, with each person to vote on every particular issue. And so when you do put this in the Constitution, you take it out of the hands of the legislature, defeats the purpose of our government. Again, just somewhat problematic.
One of the criticisms of this, of course, is that, why are we legislating morality? But the U.S. does have a history of legislating morality, isn't that so?
Probably so. I mean, what people don't realize is it's not really just about morality. There's a lot of legal significance to being married, how you hold property, and more particularly what happens when you have probate statutes in effect. If I can, make a stereotype against, the homosexual clients and friends that I've had, they're terrible estate planners, and they're the ones that need to be the most. In other words, if I, God forbid, died today without a will, all of my assets would pass to my wife by virtue of the statutes. As a homosexual partner, you don't have that ability, you don't have that right. That doesn't travel that way. In fact, it'll oftentimes travel to the decedent's family away and apart from you, and that can cause trouble down the road, especially if you've got a family in denial about the existence of their child, how they were living. So it's not as much morality as it is that what we've seen legislative is the legal significance of the marital union. I think it probably affects even, adoptions, which would be, about as close legislatively as it would get to the moral side.
Okay. So we have a yes for the Conservative Party, but a no for smaller government Republicans. And your response, Bobby, was a?
I'm clearly against this amendment.
Right. Okay. So personally, we have 2 no's. Okay. Hypothetically, we have a yes. So that's our board right here, our panel, and we'll be back with Amendment 3 after this.
Dr. Joe Thomas cares about your teeth, and it shows. Dr. Joe Thomas and his staff make your visit to the dentist comfortable, affordable, and most of all, something to smile about. Behind every sensational smile is a sensational dentist. Dr. Joe Thomas, helping children and adults show off sensational smiles.
Accidents happen, and when they do, call the experts at Vero Collision. Vero Collision has been serving Vero Beach for over a decade. Free estimates and all insurance claims are accepted. Wrecked cars? Yes. Restoration? Yes. Custom fabrication and paint? Yes. Trucks, cars, foreign and domestic, motorcycles, semis, and RVs. Vero Collision will have you looking good and back on the road in no time. Vero Collision Center, 564 1st Street, Vero Beach. 562-7008.
Welcome back to the WWCI TV10 Election Forums. I'm Lisa Reimer here in the TV10 studios with 2 attorneys in Indian River County, and we are discussing the left and the right of the amendments on November's ballot. I have with me Barry Siegel, who is representing the right, and Bobby Guttridge, who is representing the left. We are now embarking on a discussion of Amendment 3, which was put on the ballot by the Florida Taxation and Budget Reform Commission and is supported by the Florida Realtors Association. I guess it aims to ensure changes and improvements don't affect the assessed value of residential real property. And it reads like this. Actually, I think, let's see. Authorizes the legislature by general law to prohibit consideration of changes or improvements to residential real property, which increases resistance to wind damage and installation of renewable energy source devices as factors in assessing the property's value for ad valorem taxation purposes. Effective upon adoption, repeals the existing renewable energy source device exemption, no longer in effect. Oh my gosh, what happened to protections in layman's language so that the voters can actually understand what they're voting on in the polls?
Well, the full body of the amendment's available online. You can get that through the Supervisor Elections website or the Department of State, but a lot of these provisions sunset over time. And I think that this one's actually a little bit more far-reaching than what's there before. What this is saying is that if you have to make changes to your home in order to increase your ability to resist wind damage, and now, kind of the topic du jour is for changes which increase the ability to create energy at your home, that these items shouldn't increase your property valuation. Currently, under law, when you make certain changes to your home, that will trigger an increase in your property value and therefore create an increase in your taxable value and resulting property tax. It is good policy to promote these items for a number of reasons. The wind resistance, certainly, I would have to say all of us are pretty familiar with the benefits of windproofing your home, with the effects of not windproofing your home. And we could say, well, this just protects certain individuals that protect their homes. And you could even be more far-reaching to say this just protects people beachside with regard to their homes. But what this really affects is it gives an incentive to make these corrections to your home, which make our homes safer, makes them more wind resistant, and more importantly, makes our insurance more controllable if we have reasons to do these things. It gives an incentive for individuals to do these repairs now as opposed to waiting until it's too late after a storm when they do it with insurance money. And certainly insurance is an issue that is affecting all of us, those that live on the Barrier Island, those that live on the mainland, or even in the middle of the state. It's something that is very positive and has many effects, positive effects to all of us. With regard to renewable energy, again, even though it's an issue du jour, it's certainly something that we should all be looking into, whether it's solar panels for the pool or even that virtual windmill that you may have in the backyard. I mean, all of these renewable energy sources can help save, whether it's our limited energy sources here in Florida, or just to affect the value to all of us around the state. It's a good provision. Certainly, on the Republican and conservative side, less tax is better for the most part. The only issue that really needs to be focused on with this amendment is that it empowers the legislature to enforce it, as is common with most amendments. What needs to take place is you need to be vigilant with your legislatures if this item is enacted, and if this amendment is completed, you still need to be, take action with your legislators to make sure that it is enforced appropriately, that it's not leaned towards a special interest or a particular type of renewable energy or a particular brand of windproofing. We want this to be pretty broad and available, as is the intent evidenced by the amendment itself. So, I mean, from the right side, it's a big vote yes and an urge to vote yes on this. It's been recommended by a number of the local tax associations and some of the more conservative newspapers in the state.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the conservative side for all of you that just tuning in right now. And that's Barry Siegel. And now we're going to hear from the more liberal perspective, Bobby Guttridge.
I appreciate Barry going through that ad nauseum, so to speak. This is the part where we get into the really boring stuff. I will tell you, though, that I've gone sort of back and forth on this particular amendment. I find the renewable energy portion of it would encouraging the renewable energy a little bit more compelling. Unfortunately, I think what happens with this amendment is that you don't really get any bang for the buck, so to speak. You have this amendment in place, but do you really get anything from it? For the most part, I think that people are going to hurricane-proof their homes. I don't think that this is going to go out and encourage people to put up hurricane shutters. To any large degree, the people who are going to put up hurricane shutters are going to do that regardless of some very, very minimal savings on their end-of-the-year tax bill. So I don't think that you're really going to get much out of it. With regards to renewable energy, we certainly want to encourage people to use renewable energy, and that's something that I think is extremely important, especially in light of the current energy crisis. All the gas is going down this week. We certainly want to get away from dependence on foreign oil and from our enemies, and I encourage that. And one way to do that is renewable energy sources. But I don't really think that we needed a constitutional amendment to do that. What essentially there's all kinds of other ways that we can go about doing that. We can offer federal tax rebates. We can offer all kinds of other legislative maneuvers that will allow us to encourage people to install solar panels, wind if that is available, although if you're not on the beach, it probably isn't very practical in this area. But there's a lot of things that we can do with regards to that. I just don't think that a constitutional amendment is going to be effective in doing that. And the price savings per person, per individual Florida person, is going to be essentially insignificant. And you're going to lose quite a bit of money from the tax rolls. Because a penny here and a penny there may not mean much to the person who is giving up the penny, but when you take all those pennies, you're going to be giving that you're getting in basically insignificant savings from this amendment. You're going to end up with quite a bit. And I think the estimation is some 30 or $40 million in tax revenues, and that's a significant amount when we're having financial budget crises. The court systems are being cut. Everybody is worrying about how we're going to fund all the other federal programs that we have, or striking at the state programs we have. And I just don't think that this does us any justice by taking money out of the tax coffers and really giving back very little and doing a minimal amount to actually encourage people to put up shutters, something they should be doing to begin with, or investing in renewable energy.
Okay, very interesting. I also have read that the average per family or per property owner's savings would be quite minimal, and the cumulative effect would be drastic to the state, particularly after we just passed Amendment 1 in February of 2007, right? Or is it February 2008, when we double homesteaded the state, and what we actually saved per property owner, resident property owner, was so minimal, what, $240-something a year on average, but what it's done to our state coffers right now during the middle of an economic downtime.
And that's a very good point. And I think that one of the problems with these amendments is that people get all excited about these amendments. And for some reason, I've looked at these amendments throughout the years. And in fact, my wife was a driving force behind one of the controversial amendments. And they seem to be able to get passed much more easily than you might get legislation passed. And I'm not really quite sure what the dynamics of that are, but people tend to go into the booth and pull the figurative ballot lever for these amendments, and they don't typically want to vote against them. I'm not really quite sure what that is, but people get excited. And I think they got a little excited about this doubling the homestead exemption. And now, I certainly personally, I think that's nice, and when I have to pay my tax bill, that's a nice thing, but I don't think that really does much for the state of Florida. And I think the cumulative effect of all of that and the tax revenue that you then lose really creates other problems for the state of Florida. And some of those problems are economic in nature, where you don't have reinvestment, you don't have the ability to continue to shore up your infrastructure and the day-to-day services that you need. So we need to be very careful in giving these sort of minimal tax refunds to people and not getting much in return, but giving up a lot as far as a cumulative tax base and revenues to the state.
Yeah, Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, but the double homestead of the Amendment 1 that was passed earlier this year, as well as the portability issue, was supported by the Florida Board of Realtors to stimulate our real estate economy, and it didn't do that. So can you talk a little bit about what the intentions are versus, the actual results?
Well, certainly. Stimulating the economy, stimulating real estate with that amendment, one, that it's not a, one-time deal. I mean, that is to be, that's correcting what many people, myself included, was a fundamental flaw with the system that was created with the original Save Our Homes Amendment. That making the correction that we did make during the primary election and the change to the Constitution, is a long-term effective a mechanism to correct a problem that's been in place for some time. The effects or what's causing this real estate slowdown at this point is controlled by many factors, one of which may have been the homestead restraint and the inability to take that with you to your next property. I mean, certainly I have clients that was an issue. We can't afford to move because we're going to, our tax bill is going to jump 30 or 40%, even though we're making a lateral move. So yes, it did have an effect that was positive. Was that enough to bring us out of the real estate slump? No, but that was not the cause of the real estate slump at that time. Fundamentally, with taxes, maybe it's a drop in the bucket here and a drop in the bucket there, but as a conservative, every dollar you take from me for the purpose of taxes for bigger government or for more government is a dollar that I don't need to be spending for that purpose. This amendment is only addressing improvements to your existing property that will not be taken into consideration for assessed value. Certainly, if a house has these improvements and is later sold to another third party, the state will recognize the benefits at that time. This is giving an incentive or making it a little bit easier to make these improvements at this time. Can result in lower and cheaper insurance. It can result in a better sales price when you go to sell your home, both of which are much needed improvements for the state of Florida. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with the argument that even though we're not getting a lot of money, and Tallahassee is losing such a great deal, I have the issue that as a Republican, as a conservative, that every tax dollar that's taken that doesn't need to be taken is one too many.
Okay, I do want to ask, because you said, Bobby, that these constitutional amendments get a lot more emotional involvement of the citizens, perhaps, than what is legislated, and they can get passed more easily. When a ballot issue dies, does it die usually altogether, or does it get revitalized in another form? I mean, here, these are very legitimate claims. We do want to recognize people who are making improvements in their home as far as conservation and against wind, and it does affect all of us monetarily, because if there's less damage claims and our insurance, the insurance companies aren't leaving the state and closing up their doors. So, but if we don't pass this, does it just die, or will it be revitalized elsewhere?
Well, I think it's unlikely that it probably won't be revitalized as an amendment to the Constitution. It's kind of difficult to get the amendments on the Constitution. A lot of people are attempting to do it, and certainly they've gotten much more effective on it, but it takes time and money and a substantial amount of effort to get an amendment on the Constitution, on the ballot. So you probably don't get it in that form, but there's always, it's not the end of the story. Not getting the amendment passed is the end of the story for encouraging people to invest in renewable energy, or encouraging people to hurricane-proof their homes. You can give them other incentives to do that. There's always other things that you can do beyond the constitutional amendment. And let me just say this as far as my position on this. I sort of went back and forth on this a little bit. I'm not so much against it that, I was immediately said, I looked at it and said, I just don't think that's a good idea. But I think my general feeling is that we should be very careful with these amendments and passing them, and I just don't think this quite gets to the level of where you want to pass an amendment. We need to be careful in amending the Constitution, because that has a certain permanence to it, and certainly some issues are more situated that they lend themselves to a constitutional amendment, especially the first two that we discussed. I think when you start talking about issues of exempting certain items, assessed values, taxation, and while those are integral in the Constitution, I think you need to be very careful in amending the Constitution form. And for me, the benefits of this just simply aren't great enough. And in fact, I'm not really sure there are benefits of it, but if there were, I don't think the benefits are nearly enough to amend the Constitution.
Okay, anything else, Barry?
I agree with Bobby that you've got to be careful when you toy with the Constitution. I mean, it is a living, breathing document, just as our United States Constitution is. But at the same time, this is something that's already in the Constitution. This is just looking to rework some sunsetted items. I think that there is some benefit here. The property appraiser is a constitutional officer, and this is telling the constitutional officer how to do their job. So I think that this is one of those items that maybe it's borderline as whether we want it in or not the Constitution, but I think it does enough sufficient benefit to the public at large that it is good policy for our Constitution.
Okay. And that then wraps up this segment of the discussion on the amendments. We've discussed the first three, and tomorrow we will have another forum and where we discuss the other three. I want to thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for tuning into WWCI TV 10. This two-part forum, again, on the constitutional amendments, will be broadcast on alternate days throughout the week, along with many of the other candidate forums we've been airing since mid-September. Remember, early voting ends Saturday, November 1st, and the election is Tuesday, November 4th. Again, thank you for joining us on your hometown station.
Dr. Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, Bobby Guttridge. Barry Siegel, would you introduce yourself to the viewers?
Thanks, Lisa. My name is Barry Siegel. I'm an attorney here in town as well. I practice in the area of real estate law. Been a resident of Vero Beach for some time, graduating from Vero Beach High School. I live here, as does most of my family. I live here with my wife, Missy, son, Brady, and our dog, Spider-Man. Then thanks for having us.
Okay, great. So let's get started. Oh, Amendment 4. It sounds like a hot one, if we can understand it. So it's put on the ballot by Florida Taxation Budget Reform Commission, and it is very complicated. And basically, it is giving breaks to conservation land. So let's see how this reads. It requires legislature to provide a property tax exemption for real property encumbered by perpetual conservation easements or other perpetual conservation protections defined by general law. That's the first part. Okay, and requires legislature to provide for classification and assessment of land used for conservation purposes and not perpetually encumbered solely on the basis of character or use. Subjects assessment benefit to conditions, limitations, and reasonable definitions established by general law. Applies to property taxes beginning in 2010. Wow. So you'd need a JD actually to be able to understand that. Bobby, why don't you start, since you have a JD?
You probably need a JD and then some to
Right.
understand it. It's complicated language. We were talking offset just a few minutes ago. These amendments are supposed to be reviewed by the Supreme Court and be accessible to any layman reading them. This one certainly is not, as many of them are not. However, this particular amendment actually has some degree of importance to the folks in Florida. And the reason for that is that the character of this state is essentially our wildlife, our parklands, our wetlands. These are the things, at least in my view, and growing up here, I've been living here in Florida all my life, 43 years. Part of that in Ocala, which is also has a lot of conservation area, forests and woods and things that we want to leave to our kids. And what this amendment essentially does, it allows people to set aside property for that purpose and not have that taxed as a parking lot for a high-rise building that sits next door. And that's an important thing for the state of Florida and for all the wildlife that we have in the state of Florida, because we would definitely want to preserve that land. We want to preserve those habitats for the wildlife, especially here in the Indian River County, where that really gives the character of the Treasure Coast and the Indian River County, and specifically Vero Beach. It's sort of signature character and gives it a wonderful place to live. I'm a recent parent, and I certainly want my own daughter to grow up in an area where she can go out and she can see the wildlife in its natural form. She doesn't have to go to a zoo. She doesn't have to go to a concrete park in order to see what we have in abundance here in our own community as wildlife. And so my basic position is, and it's a fairly strong one, that this is a very good amendment for the state of Florida. It's a very good amendment for the Treasure Coast, for Indian River County, and specifically for Vero Beach in maintaining the character of our community.
Okay, thank you, Bobby Guttridge. And now that's the liberal side. And so let's hear from the conservative, Barry Siegel.
Thank you, Lisa. It's an interesting analysis on an amendment like this. Certainly the liberal image is always that tree hugger, always reaching for the green grass and not letting the trees come down. My analysis of this amendment is more from the conservative side, but looking at it for tax purposes. Again, the taxpayers associations have reviewed this amendment and have voted overwhelmingly in favor of supporting this amendment for those reasons. What this amendment really says is to the legislature, create a new exemption for land that is permanently designated as conservation land. In other words, the property appraiser, when he does or she does her job, goes out to a property and determines what's the highest and best use for this property. In other words, it's an open field and they're growing flowers on it and they're letting kids play on it, but it could be a condominium high-rise. All right, tax it at that highest and best use. And that's the problem, is that you're using bad tax policy to require property to be used in a certain way that maybe isn't consistent with the good things that Florida stands for, and a lot of those things that Bobby was stating are important about Florida. Yes, we want our kids to be able to grow up and be able to see some green grass, and we want them to be able to see the sky without having to look straight up. And so what this does is it takes bad tax policy off the books, and it creates an exemption that says, listen, if the property is being used for this conservation purpose, then go ahead and tax it as conservation land. What that may mean, to some extent, is taking it off the tax rolls altogether, depending on how the legislature elects to move ahead with this, especially with regard to permanently encumbered conservation lands. In other words, what that would mean is, as this land is dedicated and receives that benefit, the owner has made a permanent decision to do this. And one of the things I like about this, one of the popular issues, has been what we've been doing with the Sexton ranches. How much money are we spending of taxpayer dollars to buy land development rights to property? Families still get to keep and own their properties, but the county's shelling out millions upon millions of dollars to achieve conservation land. What this says is, go ahead, convert your land down to conservation, and we'll stop taking the taxes. You still own it, but the county's not having to shell out, or the state of Florida is not having to shell out a lot of the money that's necessary to get this land. We're taking bad tax policy and making a positive out of it. It also goes a little bit further to allow land that is not necessarily permanently encumbered with conservation easements or for conservation purposes, but at least allows for the time being that, hey, this property is being used as a park, it's being used as a wetland, it's being used as some environmentally friendly policy. Let's at least give the owner the benefit of the doubt at this time that they will receive, most likely, a lesser tax burden than they would if it's being taxed at highest and best use. If it's being taxed at highest and best use, the owner of land is going to have no choice but to use that highest and best use in order to cover the tax burden. If you own that land and it's really going to be prime condominium land, but you really would just like to keep it as a park, as a lake, as a pond, as even just trees, this gives you the ability to do so, as opposed to bad tax policy forcing you to take it and turn it into the most profitable use. And chances are the most profitable use is going to be the most objectionable use in terms of environmentally and aesthetic appearance. So for tax reasons alone, it's my opinion and the conservative view to vote in favor of this amendment.
Okay. I'd like to bring this up. When citrus canker came through this area, we did a few things because we were going to destroy the groves, to get rid of the canker, and we put a hold on taxing the land as vacant land. So they had 3 years to let the canker go through, that they were going to be able to replant, and then they had an absolute deadline. And instead of changing, if they didn't meet those deadlines, instead of changing from ag land taxation to vacant land taxation, they would have the ag land extend. It sounds you know, from a non-tree hugging perspective, that this is a way of legislating the big landowners to hold on to their land for longer without developers buying it, because the market's very soft. So you're saying that there's two pieces here. One is actual conservation land in perpetuity, which we don't know how long that is because people do have short memories. But also the other part is land that is not in perpetuity, but is being used as conservation land now, which actually could just be ag land that's no longer being grown on, and they don't want to get taxed like vacant land. So let's talk about those two parts.
Well, I agree with you. It could be utilized in that manner. But the truth is, I'm not sure that's such a bad thing. You know, it puts off the development. It slows down development to some degree, and for people who want to keep that land as conservation land. And certainly, the longer you do that, the less development you're going to have. And we need to slow up the development to some degrees. We just don't need to get in a situation. And you know, we're suffering somewhat because of that now. You just see this overdevelopment. People think that they can just make money, put up another condo, put up another high-rise building, lay down some more concrete, and they'll continue to make money. But in fact, that doesn't really work that way. And the longer we can hold on to the natural lands and to the parks and to the land that just has trees on it, I think the better off we are. And to whatever they may, big landholders and big landowners may be getting, in fact would get some tax benefit with regards to this, but whatever benefit they get, I think in the long run, the slowdown of development that it will cause, the one less condo that they sell, the not putting up a bunch of track houses on their property and leaving it as trees for a while longer is just not such a bad thing. And on the other end of it, there's some of these lands that are permanently encumbered, theoretically are going to remain conservation lands, and those folks should not be taxed in a manner that is not consistent with how they're using it. And as a practical matter, I'm not really sure. You know, if you're not using it as development land, I'm not sure that you should be taxed that way. And I know that's somewhat of a conservative view, but I just don't think that strikes at fairness, and it doesn't strike at just the values of this state to tax something just because you could do something with it. And I think that what we want to do is encourage these folks, the big landowners and even small landowners, to do something other than just put up parking lots. And eventually we may all have parking lots. You know, you may get what you ask for in a sense of that, but I think the slower it takes, the better off it is for the citizens of Florida, especially for the citizens of this particular community.
Okay, thank you, Bobby Guttridge.
I mean, just to kind of address some of the comments you said, and Bobby's right, that if it is, you know, with regard to the first half of this amendment, with regard to permanent encumbrances, I mean, it is a recorded document, it is a recorded easement, that if one day it were to be set aside, it would require at least local approval, depending on the property, depending on the nature of the conservation easement. And at that time, if someone's got the financial incentive to bring it out, you may also have a county there that says, well, we'll allow it, but you're going to pay us back X amount on what you've received as a benefit. So that it wouldn't come without a price to be able to take permanently encumbered land off of the conservation rolls, if at all possible. I mean, the way these easements are set up is it is really somewhat of a permanent item, and it's designed to outlast all of us, so short memories generally don't become a problem. But I mean, and you know, it can be reversed, but it would come at a price. You know, and just, you know, I don't think it can be urged enough that having to do something with your land or your business or any of your property for tax in order to avoid oppressive tax effects is never good policy for any government. And that's what this looks to correct. You know, maybe my property, it would make a great park right now. It certainly is not a time to make it a condominium building or even a housing development. And so it gives me the opportunity to take this land and keep it on the hold and not be forced as a result of higher taxes to develop this land.
Okay, you both then say yes, and so playing the devil's advocate, I just have to say that Florida doesn't have an income tax. And here we are, you know, with 15% just in our county of the ad valorem taxes, 15% budget cuts basically across the board. Governor Chris has already said prepare for 10% more next year, at least at this point. We have a very slow housing market. Is this the time to give tax breaks to landowners, sometimes large landowners, when that's what sustains our infrastructure?
Lisa, I think I certainly understand your point, and I'll tell you, I think you got to look very closely at all the amendments and all of the law that goes into place to make sure that we're not just giving away tax dollars. I think we need to preserve as much of the tax dollars as we possibly can. I think the problem with this particular amendment is it does so with the character of the state, and I think what happens when you do that is it may look good at the time, but when you start driving people away from Florida, and people are coming to Florida because they love the nature of it, they love the beaches, they love the marinas, which we're going to talk about in the next amendment. They love the parks, and they love the wildlife. You start getting rid of that, and you start making people have to actually live in a place that they don't want to live, not come into an area that they thought they were coming into, and I think you end up with some long-term problems. And the other issue is just as a general purpose, you're not going to want to have a lot of investors come here if they're going to be forced to do something with their property because it's too expensive to do something otherwise. If you have a piece of land and you have and you're holding on to that land, especially in these depressed economic times, and you're being taxed at the rate of the next door 20-story condo, you're going to be very hesitant, and you may not be able to hold on to that land. So you're going to be selling it and selling it and selling it, or trying to sell it, and maybe you just won't be able to, and you're going to end up with in a bad financial situation. And that's actually going to, I think, deter people from coming here investing in Florida that may want to put up investment properties because they can't hang on to that property until it's financially feasible for them to do something different with it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you make, that, I mean, our early settlers, they planted groves because it was the best use of the land at that time, and we don't want to make it more attractive to put up parking lots, right? So, okay, that wraps up Amendment 4. We'll be back with more after this word from our sponsor. A smile, a simple smile can brighten up the whole world. What's between you and your beautiful smile?
I'm getting dentures, uppers and bottoms. I sat down, I'm deathly afraid of needles and pain, and I sat down in the chair. Next thing I know, my face was numb. I didn't even feel the needles. I highly recommend Dr. Thomas. Him and his staff are wonderful.
Dr. Joe Thomas's friendly staff makes every visit to the dentist a pleasure. Dr. Joe Thomas, creating sensational smiles.
I'm Sheriff Roy Raymond, and I'm proud to support Darrell Lohr as your next sheriff of Indian River County. Darrell is the most qualified candidate and will continue to protect us.
Thanks, Sheriff. As your next sheriff, I promise to be fiscally responsible. I will listen to concerns and answer any questions from our citizens. I will be sheriff of and for the people. I will protect everyone in Indian River County and take a tough stance against crime. Please remember to vote Darrell Lohr, November 4th.
Welcome back to the WWCI TV Election Forum. I'm Lisa Reimer here in the TV10 studios with Barry Siegel and Bobby Guttridge, who are representing right and left, respectively. And we are talking about the amendments, 3 of the amendments of the 6 that will appear on November's ballot. On yesterday and tomorrow, we'll be talking about the other 3. Okay, so we're now going to discuss Amendment 6, which was placed on the ballot by the Florida Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. It's an assessment of working waterfront property based on current use, and it provides for assessment based upon use of land used predominantly for commercial fishing purposes, land used for vessel launches into waters that are navigable and accessible to the public, marinas and dry stacks that are open to the public, and water-dependent marine manufacturing facilities, commercial fishing facilities, and marine vessel construction and repair facilities and their support activities, subject to conditions, limitations, and reasonable definitions specified by general law. Okay, a yes vote means the amendment would give tax breaks to the state's marine industry, right? Bobby?
Well, essentially, it'll give tax breaks to folks who are on the water. You said the marine industry. I'm not really sure that you know. You have to be careful in the characterization, I suppose, because some of these people, mom and pop marines and local folks who have lived on the water and provide services to the folks in the community. This particular amendment is very similar to the Amendment 4, which gives tax break to folks, so they don't have to use it for, they don't have to be taxed at the highest and best use. And it certainly affects the folks on the waterfront probably more than anybody else, because that's the most valuable land. That's the land that's being bought up by developers, and that's where people want to come and move. They want to be able to see the ocean or the Indian River from their 20-story condo waterfront apartment. But unfortunately what will happen is if we don't allow for this particular amendment, you're likely to see the same thing you're likely to see with the conservation land. These folks just aren't going to be able to stay there. You know, if you have Jim and Myrtle who have the boat ramp that they've had for 20 years that's sitting right on the waterfront, and they've helped launch people's fishermen, local sportsmen, from that particular marina their entire lives, and they begin getting taxed the same as the fellow who just bought the property a quarter mile up the road and has now built either condos or luxury homes on that. He's just not going to be able to afford to have that. And we really, that's something that we really can't allow in Florida, because we are a water state. We're surrounded by water on 3 sides, and everything we do is really related to our interaction with the lakes and the Indian River and the Atlantic Ocean, and of course on the west coast the Gulf. And you certainly don't want to see that character of Florida being diminished. And it's really important in our particular county because Indian River, we are on Indian River and on the beaches, and we have a direct influence on the beachfront and the riverfront property that affects all the land in the cities on the Treasure Coast. And so it'd be really, I think if we don't get this amendment passed, you're going to see nothing but developers come in. It may not be tomorrow, and it may not be the next day. Of course, it may be. When these folks just can't afford to hang on to their properties because the tax bill is just too much, and that'd really be a real shame, I think.
Okay, thank you, Bobby Guttridge. That's the the liberal side, and he says yes, right?
I do, yes.
Yes. Okay, and what do the conservatives say? Barry Siegel.
The conservative would be a yes as well, and similar to what we discussed with the previous amendment, number 4, that this, again, tax policy is starting to dictate business decisions and land use decisions. This amendment is reflective of the change of the times that we've seen, you know, since this Constitution was written. The marine industry wasn't the presence that it was when the Constitution was written, and the tax system was established. Even after that was established, we never really had the effect of the beach side and the water side development. Now water, you know, when Indian River County was formed, living on the water, you know, was a curse. I mean, it was mosquitoes and trees and vines and undevelopable land. That certainly has changed very recently, and what has happened is it's caused tax policy to create impossible uses or impossible continued uses for property. Years ago, we established the Save Our Homes Amendment to save homesteads from this particular damage. Property values increasing around us as new uses were being established for land that would then cause highest and best use of mom and pop's property from escalating where they couldn't afford to live on it for tax reasons. So that's what happened with Save Our Homes, and that was recently, updated in February, as we talked about in the previous show. This one is what you're finding is that residential developers are finding that the untapped waterfront properties are a pot of gold. And I think this has more application here on the Treasure Coast and very specifically Indian River County than it does on a lot of the other waterfront counties in the state that have already seen the development, certainly those to the south of us and those much to the north of us. But parts of the Panhandle and parts of the Treasure Coast are going to find that this is an ever-increasing problem. How many times have you heard someone say, I can't afford to live here anymore because the taxes have just gone out of crazy? Well, now it's going to be, I can't afford to keep the bait shop, I can't afford to keep the marina, I can't afford to let you keep using this marina unless I drastically increase my prices because the taxes have gone out of hand. So for those reasons, for good tax policy, the conservative decision on this amendment is a strong vote for the yes.
Okay, one of the problems that I have with this amendment is that it's a special. It only protects one special group, but it brings to light definitely that the way our ad valorem taxes are levied is not fair. It's not fair to the small business owners. And while we have all kinds of protections for permanent residents, we have the homestead, now double homestead, we have the Save Our Homes 3% cap, we don't have any of those protections for business owners or for renters. And so they see sometimes exorbitant increases in their taxes every year. Particularly, like you said, if Joe Fishing Man has a place up on the river, and then down the road, someone just built a condo, and it increased the value of the land all over the place and raised everyone's taxes. So, so we're protecting this special group. Does that seem unfair? What about the property owners in downtown Vero?
Well, there's always going to be some unfairness whenever you're talking about tax policy. Giving people tax breaks for specific things, and other people are going to not appreciate not getting tax breaks on their own. And you can't give everybody everything, unfortunately. But what this does is it really protects character of the state, unlike business owners and other folks who may be affected by not getting this similar tax treatment. This affects actually the character of the state. And it's not really unprecedented to try and do that, as it affects the the character of the state. I mean, if you read, in reading, in fact, I went back and read the articles because I haven't read the Florida State Constitution, especially Article 7, which is, essentially real estate stuff, which Mr. Siegel probably knows backwards and forwards. But I went back and read Article 7. And Section 4 of that, there's actually, right now there is the agriculture exemption, and if we recall back many, many years ago, and I grew up in Ocala, this state was essentially an agricultural state, and I think that was in the Indian River County before I came to it, where it was mostly citrus. And there's been exemptions for other things to make sure that they had that we protected the character of what brought money to the state, what made the state special, what made this a state, a place that people would come to and live and raise their families. And it used to be agriculture, and it's still to some degree, in certain part of the states it is. But it's not unprecedented. This would just be adding another exemption that would help protect the character of the state, i.e. marines and waterfront property, and just some local folks who provide a very valuable service to the community. And we just don't want to lose those folks and the ability to get out on the water and to enjoy the waterways and the beaches and the rivers in the state of Florida. And certainly not in Treasure Coast.
Okay, so then, Barry, who picks up the slack? I mean, here we are in the middle of one of the worst economic times that I've seen in my lifetime, and we don't, and the political analysts or the economic analysts say, we have 10 more years of this, and we're just at the beginning of that 10-year mark. Who picks up the slack? I mean, cost of living keeps going up, our tax rolls are down, and yet we're talking about cutting more taxes.
Well, I mean, a couple thoughts on that. First of all, you know, more taxes have never been the answer for any problem or any solution with government. You know, bigger government has never been the answer to resolving economic problems. Certainly there's disparities in the tax laws, as you mentioned before, but lower taxes will lead to lower tax rates will lead to higher revenues for the state and better business and better policy. I mean, I can't help to wonder, you know, as you drive down A1A in South Florida and you can't see the ocean because everything is encumbered with, you know, a 40-story building, what would mom and pop have made as decisions different back then? I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying it's worse. I'm happy to live here in Indian River County where we don't have that problem. But you have to wonder how many of those decisions were made strictly on the result of bad tax policy that forced the development of property. So I don't concern myself that we're looking at budget cuts when I evaluate this amendment. I think that this is almost like the presence of locusts that have come in and changed the landscape of what we have to look at, especially on the waterfront. And through no fault of their own, with these marinas, with these fisheries, with these waterfront businesses, through no fault of their own, are their taxes increasing as a result of the development that's happening around them. We're not looking to give them a tax break depending on how the legislature writes this. They're not necessarily going to see a reduction in their taxes, but what they're not going to see is an increase for this fictional value that's established on their property when it's inconsistent with their use, and what Mr. Guttridge probably argues properly is the best use for the property. That should Florida find itself in a situation where it can't afford the space for marinas, that it can't afford fisheries for fishing boats, that the effect on that will be much greater, and to lose that segment of industry and that section of our recreational abilities as a result of bad tax policy or in the name of increasing taxes to pay for more items, you know, goes against everything that the conservative movement would stand for, and certainly the Republican Party. You know, I think that it was kind of, it came out of one of the presidential debates. They said, you know, maybe the American people, not Congress, not, you know, not the Wall Street, but maybe the American people have kind of gotten drunk over the last, you know, 10 years. And I think that to some extent it's true. I mean, government has grown so immensely because the money was there, not because it needed to, but because the money was there. And a lot of money went to a lot of places that didn't need to be, and what we found is now we're stuck with this beast. We've seen some action out of the department, you know, the Board of Education here locally, that they're saying let's start fresh with a budget, and maybe that's the answer with some of these budget issues, not to keep feeding the beast and worrying about budget cuts when perhaps we're already funding a budget that is grossly overinflated.
Okay, does anyone have anything else that you'd like to say?
Just one quick point. You know, with regard to our local community, I think that this is an important amendment for us locally. Now, there may be some debate with folks who are landlocked, who live in my former place of residence, Ocala, or any of these landlocked areas. But for the folks who live on the riverside and on the beach side and by the water, we don't want to become, I don't think, and I think most people that live in this community don't want to become Miami. We don't want to have that problem, and that leads to all kinds of other problems, crimes, and having to spend more and more money on other things. And ultimately, for our community, it just doesn't seem like a very good deal.
Okay, one last question. I noticed that some of these amendments that I've read, it says that it requires 60% of voter approval to pass. Is that for all constitutional amendments or just some particular ones, like this one? It requires 60% voter approval.
My understanding is that 60% is across the board. That's what it requires for the
all constitutional amendments.
Right.
Okay. Okay. And then that means that we have one last amendment, and we will cover that after this message from our sponsor.
Having strong, beautiful teeth is part of a healthy lifestyle. Dr. Joe Thomas uses the newest technologies and procedures to provide you with exceptional dental care. Intraoral cameras are used for disease diagnosis and patient education. Digital x-rays significantly reduce the amount of radiation and improves the quality of the diagnosis. Dr. Thomas only uses all porcelain crowns, so there is no danger of allergic reactions to metal. porcelain crowns are more natural looking too, and they're made right in Dr. Thomas's lab, so you get your new crown the same day as your visit. Dr. Joe Thomas cares about the health of your teeth, and it shows.
Hi, my name is Brian Heady. I'm asking for your vote so I can represent you to cut wasteful spending. In today's economy, I do not support higher taxes. I support reduced government spending that will decrease our collective tax burden. Help me help you by casting your vote in November for Brian Heady for County Commissioner. This is paid for by the campaign to elect Brian Heady, and I approve this message.
Welcome back to the WWCI TV 10 Election Forum. I'm Lisa Reimer with our final segment on the amendments that we're speaking with the liberal and the conservative pundits here in the TV 10 studios. We are now on Constitutional Amendment 8, and I have with me Bobby Guttridge representing the liberal side, and Barry Siegel, who's representing the conservatives. Okay, so Amendment 8 was put on the ballot by the Florida Taxation and Budget Reform Commission. It's a local option community college funding, and it proposes an amendment to the state constitution to require that the legislature authorize counties to levy a local option sales tax to supplement community college funding, requiring voter approval to levy the tax, providing that approved taxes will sunset after 5 years and may be reauthorized by the voters. Okay, so we're going to find out what that exactly means, and we're going to begin with Bobby Guttridge presenting the liberal perspective.
Well, I can tell you that I'm not for this, and I'll tell you why I'm not for it. Generally, I am for increasing the budget for education. I think it's one of the failures of the state of Florida. I think it's something we need to concentrate on, and for the future good of the state of Florida, we need to invest in the youth of our country, and we need to invest in the youth of the state and do that financially. But I think what happens with this particular amendment, which actually shifts the burden to the local governments and to the local communities, and I know they're not saying it shifts it, but I think the practical effect is it does, because I think practically what will happen is if the community college starts to raise the issue of getting additional revenues vis-a-vis a local sales tax with the community. And that's really what this authorizes to do, is to get a local sales tax, and that money to go directly to community colleges. I think what happens in Tallahassee is they say, okay, you now have a local option to get money, and we're going to start cutting the budget. And I don't think that education is a place where Tallahassee should be cutting the budget, and I think that's what will happen. And you see it every time there's any sort of legislation, any sort of thing that's supposed to help education and raise funds for education in the state of Florida. And I think this is probably what happens everywhere around the country. I don't think it's just Florida that this goes on in. But what happens is that money gets raised presumptively for education, and maybe it goes toward education, like the lottery. But education never gets that money. If they do get it, it's offset by what Tallahassee will budget for education. And on a whole, what you end up with is just less money for education. And the particular problem with this is it would require action on the part of the local communities to put it forth for a referendum in order to raise the sales tax. You then raise the sales tax, which first of all is I just don't think that that's a very good plan in trying to raise money for community colleges. But this has a 5-year sunset provision, meaning that you have to re-up after 5 years. So people will have to re-vote this in after a 5-year period. What I think may very well happen, and what I suspect will happen if this amendment passes, is a lot of the local community colleges will begin pushing to get more money, because that's what they want to do. They will put this on the ballot, and perhaps it passes. You get people to agree to an additional sales tax, although I'm not really sure that that will happen. But if it does happen, they will then start seeing budget cuts to their particular programs from the state. You don't need the money. You've raised the money on your own. You're doing great. You don't need our money. We've got to make budget cuts somewhere, and you're it. All of a sudden, 5 years has passed, and the citizens are sick of paying an additional sales tax. And they say, we're not going to do that. Now the money's gone, and the money that was allocated from the state budget is gone, and the community colleges don't have anywhere to get that money unless they can raise it from private folks. I think what happens, in my opinion on this particular amendment, is it is a shift from the state to the local level. It may be maybe the motivation is to try and get the local folks to take a bigger responsibility. But ultimately, I don't think it works. It may and will end up in budgetary cuts for education, and education in the state of Florida is just going to suffer from it, especially in the community colleges, which are really the gateway toward higher education for a lot of folks who otherwise may not have college available for them.
Okay, thank you very much. Bobby Guttridge, that's the liberal no. No on Amendment 8. The conservative, Barry Siegel.
Thank you, Liz. I mean, you know, what should probably be clear, when speaking, especially from the right, the tax policy is very important to the background of the Republican Party. Education is just as important, and certainly I think our community colleges probably show as much success with what they're given as do any of our state universities, and possibly when we talk about most bang for the buck, we do get that better return from our community colleges. That said, I can't support this amendment, nor would the Republican Party or as a conservative movement support this for a lot of reasons, not just those that Mr. Guttridge got into. First and foremost, this amendment doesn't state how much that assessment is going to be for each local sales tax option. Indian River County has been running a 1 cent or 1% sales tax option for the last number of years. Let's assume that we're only talking about 1 cent, but that's going to be 1 cent on everything. On a pack of gum, it's negligible. On a car, it's a whole different story. Right now, when we've got people struggling to make ends meet, additional taxes are not the answer. Less spending is. You know, if we just talk about a penny or 1%, your gallon of gas may go up, could go up 50 cents again. Or excuse me, your fill up on gas go up another 50 cents every time you fill up your car. Already having enough problems with that. One of the other big problems with this provision is that there's nothing in here that says that every cent collected here in Indian River County is going to go to Indian River Community College. It may end up at Miami-Dade Community College. It may end up in Valencia. There's nothing in here that says that this money is to stay local. It's very possible this money is just going to go into the general revenue fund that's established for the community colleges, and every penny raised here, or every part of this tax that's raised here, could go elsewhere in the state. Could go to less fortunate counties, could go to more populous counties. It depends on how the legislature is going to approach the expenditure. It is a lot like the lottery, that what would probably happen is the legislature will see, well, we know we want to fund $2.5 billion for community colleges this year. Hey, look, we just got all this money in from the sales tax revenue. Now we can use the general revenue that was going to go to the community colleges to go elsewhere. It's not going to supplant what's happening here, which was the big promise of the lottery, is that all this money would go to education. Well, certainly all the money from the lottery goes to education, but all the other money that was going to education before that is now going to roads, prisons, welfare, health care, whatnot. All maybe good causes in everyone's opinion, but that was not the purpose of what the lottery was sold to us as. The 5-year provision on the sunset, Mr. Guttridge again says that correctly, is that after this goes away, if this goes away in 5 years, you're going to have budget shortfalls that are going to have to come from somewhere else. That if we're going to either this community colleges will be looking at drastic cuts, or or we're going to lose cuts in other services or other items that are provided by the government, and that would be fine, except that if the community college has maintained a baseline funding consistent with what has been funded for the last 10 years and it continues forward on that baseline, how are you going to then cut, what are you going to have? What are you going to do when they go to cut the community college funding at that point? So it's again, it's bad tax policy. This is one of those things that shows up as an amendment. It does come out of our legislature, and it shows up on the ballot, and the voters needs to be careful that when they go there and says, this looks great. I love community college. My kids go to community college. It saves me a bundle not having to send them to Tallahassee. But at the same time, this will have a deep fiscal effect, not just that amount that comes out of your pocket, but it will have effects on the way the community colleges are funding, and it's going to just allow for bigger, more expensive government, where we're not intending it with this great, otherwise great-looking amendment. So my vote on this is no as well.
Okay. So I think that you make a very good point, obviously, both of you, that when taxpayers give up an inch, the government takes a yard. And so we don't know, like with the lottery, when we put our money, when we supplement education, they're going to take it away somewhere else. But, with this, I think this amendment is interesting because it's not saying, do you approve a sales tax increase? It says, do we authorize our counties to basically ask for a sales tax increase? So if there were, for instance, a project that Indian River State College wanted, they'd then have to put it on the ballot here in Indian River County. In fact, I think that it has to go because Indian River State College services St. Lucie County, Indian River County, and parts of Martin County, that it would have to be passed at 60% through all 3 counties, and they would have to then negotiate a sales tax increase. Is that correct?
I don't know that it would require, the 60% is to pass this amendment. To then enact the sales tax levy may just require a simple majority.
Okay.
Depending on how it's written up.
But so it doesn't say if you vote yes on this, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to have a sales tax increase.
It doesn't, but I think it is going to put an awful lot of pressure on the individual community colleges to do that, because I think you're going to see just cuts in the state community college budget. There's not, they're not effectively saying that, but I think effectively that is what's going to happen. You'll see cuts in community college budgets if this goes forward, and their rationale is going to be, the folks in Tallahassee's rationale is going to be, why should we give you the money when you can go out and get it on your own? And if they're not going out and getting it on their own, they're going to be, well, you should be trying to go out and get the money on your own. And Billy raises a good point, because I think what happens is you look at this amendment, and I think it's probably more dangerous with this amendment, because I think it might be titled Local Options for Community College Funding. And that sounds great, because most folks, and I'll probably get all kinds of calls on this tomorrow at my house. So why do you hate community colleges? I don't hate community colleges. I love community colleges. I think that is one of the greatest institutions that we have in the state of Florida for getting folks an education and getting them into four-year colleges they might not otherwise be able to afford, or might not otherwise be qualified to go to based on the areas that they came from and the educational standards that they came from. And so you look at this, and when I look at it, I'm like, oh, well, I'm really for education. And so my initial reaction when I read this, local option for community college funding, is, gosh, I'm going to be for that. But then when you start going through it, you realize that this isn't a good thing for the community colleges. And I think that the folks that head the community colleges will see it. It'll look like a big shiny prize in front of them, and eventually what will happen, and almost certainly what will happen, is they'll be sorry that they did it, because the long-term benefit just will not be good for them.
I think that President Massey did say that he was behind this, although he didn't know that he supported it, not that he was behind this proposal, but that he did support it, although he didn't have any projects on the books right now. One of the things, though, that taking the devil's advocate, because you both have said no to this amendment, is that we have on the Treasure Coast really hung our hat of hope on the rack of biotechnology. Institutions like Scripps coming into the Treasure Coast, and I mean, we would like to be able to bolster the programming that we have at the community college level so that we don't have brain drain as much in this area, you know, where you go to college and then you can't come back home because there are no jobs. We're trying to bring jobs to this coast, and if kids want to stay close to home, because this is, you know, that piece of paradise that we are working really hard to keep with our waterfront protection and our conservation land tax exemptions, then wouldn't this be a good thing to create a greater revenue stream so that we have colleges right here that makes in fact, it even increases our property values if we have a 4-year at least institution right here.
And there's no question about it. And you know, I'm really going to sound like a Republican to a lot of folks now saying this, but I think that the real answer to the community college situation on a local basis is not the sales tax. Well, first of all, the sales tax really is going to affect poor people probably a little bit more than it's going to affect more affluent people, and I just don't think that's a very fair tax. But beyond that, I don't think it's going to be effective. And, you know, if we're that committed to the community colleges, we should start the community colleges themselves and the communities should begin looking at some sort of private funding. I don't think that is something that's out of line. If you really care about the community colleges, you don't need to put another tax on the people that can least afford it. What you need to really do is start going toward privatization, start getting some private money in, and if it's an important issue, I think they'll be able to do it. You've seen that with hospitals, you've seen it with a lot of other folks, a lot of other industries that also get tax money, but supplement that with private donations, and it can be very effective, and I think effective on the Treasure Coast, and I'd be more for that than I would be for this particular tax. Now, if it were to come up as a state issue, I would be more inclined to be more favorable to it. I just don't think at this local level it's going to be very effective and or very fair.
Barry?
I mean, I tend to agree. I mean, I think that, you know, our Indian River State College has done a great job bringing in a lot of its new programs, the Richardson Center, the Homeland Security Center. I think they've received a lot of great support from local funding and local support. I don't think that shifting tax dollars this way is proper fiscal policy for doing that. I mean, it's taking money out of the economy when the last thing we need to be doing right now is taking money out of the economy and putting it into government. We talked earlier in an earlier segment that even though it's a penny here or a penny there, and presumably we're talking about, you know, maybe a penny surtax, but there's nothing here that says it is. I mean, at some point it could, you know, budget requirements could say we need 3 cents per dollar. But even, you know, at a penny here and a penny there, it doesn't sound like much. It sounds easy. But when it comes time to buying a car, buying an appliance for your home, all of a sudden that 1% owns up. And that's the problem. So it's just bad tax policy. I think it gives our legislature a free pass on a difficult issue. You know, we elect you to go up there and make good fiscal policy. Don't throw this out. Don't ask us for a lifeline here. You know, trying to save you so you can go spend and fund other projects.
Okay. Okay, great. So I just do want to point out, we in the state of Florida, we have a 6% sales tax. Until 2019 in Indian River County, we have an additional 1% surtax. And then now we're being, perhaps if this passes, faced with another 0.5% or 1% sales tax, so that we could be up to 8 cents on the dollar rather than the 7 cents that we're currently living with. Okay, so just as a recap, Amendment 1, if you want to get out a piece of paper and a pen, both the Liberal and the Conservative voted yes. Amendment 2, Conservative, well, we're sort of split. The Conservative, the far right voted yes. The Reagan Republicans voted no, and then the Liberals no. And so, and Amendment 3, Conservative yes, Liberal no. Amendment 4, Liberal yes, Conservative yes. Amendment 6, Liberal yes, Conservative yes. And Amendment 8, Liberal no, Conservative no. Okay, so thank you so very much for joining us for this forum. It was very interesting and informative.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to WWCI TV 10. This two-part forum on the constitutional amendments will be broadcast on alternate days throughout the week, along with many of the other candidate forums we've been airing since mid-September. Remember, early voting ends Saturday, November 1st, and the election is Tuesday, November 4th. Again, thank you for joining us on your hometown station.
Dr. Joe